Should I keep my mic? I keep my mic muted, or should I do
Yeah,
the?
you can stay muted for now, and then we'll. Alrighty. Welcome back, everybody. Nice to have you on for this next session. As I noted earlier, we have second section of the day, being your authentic self, understanding identity and intersectionality. I am beyond excited for this session. We have two amazing esteemed panelists. I'm going to go ahead at this point and introduce our moderator today. Our moderator is Dr. Andrew McIntosh from RISE. Andrew is the Chief Program Officer at RISE, and he's been just an incredible inclusion partner in this space. We have had the fortunate opportunity of getting the chance to work with RISE over the past 3 to 4 years, and I've had the honor of working really closely with Andrew over those years. As the Chief Program Officer, which is a position that leads him to translate RISE's mission to educate and empower the sports community into programs for various audience and contexts, Andrew has worked within the US and internationally, helping various organizations design and implement sports initiatives that help build life skills and character. Before RISE, he worked at Michigan State's Institute for the Study of Youth Sport. There's really, truly nobody better to lead this session on identity and intersectionality. So Andrew, I am going to get off the screen here, turn things over to you, and excited to get today's sessions going.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kate. It's phenomenal to be here with America East again, and to be having these conversations. I'm joined today by two wonderful panelists. We had one panelist who had an emergency, could not be a part of today's discussion. That is Nevin Capel. But we're excited to kind of push on and have a really wonderful conversation today with both Deja and Mac. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to introduce them quickly and then get into our conversation today. But Deja and Mac, thanks for being here. So Deja Young is an American Paralympic track and field athlete. She's born with brachial plexus that caused nerve damage and limited mobility to her right shoulder. She has excelled with her unique running form. She earned a track scholarship to Wichita State University, where she earned all conference recognition. It was at a college meet that she learned about Paralympic track and field, a path that would lead her to her first Paralympic titles at the Paralympic Games in Rio in 2016. She's a two-time Paralympian in 2016 and in 2020, and a three-time medalist with 2 golds and 1 bronze. So thanks for being here with us this morning, Deja.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm super excited for this conversation.
Wonderful. And then we have Mac. Mac Beggs is a 2-time Texas State Wrestling Champion and a current psychology undergraduate major at Life University. Mac has an impressive wrestling career so far, but more importantly, serves as an advocate for transgender youth, working to overturn Senate bills that attempt to discriminate against the trans community. Mac was featured in a 2019 ESPN 30 for 30 short film called Mac Wrestle, as well as the Changing the Game Hulu documentary that has won GLAAD's Outstanding Documentary and Frameline San Francisco International LGBTQ Film Festival Audience Award. Mac recently co-founded the Team Mac Fair project to provide more inclusive atmospheres to all athletes. So thanks for being here today with us, Mac.
Thank you. I really enjoyed being here, and I love being here. Thank you for having me on.
Wonderful, wonderful. And today, right, the goal of our discussion today is to really talk about identity and talk about intersectionality as a part of that. You know, in the work that we do at RISE, we focus really kind of exclusively in some ways on racism, but more broadly think about social justice. And obviously intersectionality plays a role in that. So really excited to explore this conversation with you today. I think one of the things I just want to kind of frame the conversation around is, as we think about a lot of the isms that we face in this world, they are based on people's identities, right? Us limiting folks to just one aspect of their identity. And I think that could be troubling in many ways. So I'm really hoping that this conversation around intersectionality really opens people's eyes around that. So having said that and setting it up that way, I guess I'd love for both of you to introduce yourselves a little bit more. And I think in what I shared across, I felt like a really cool way to do that might be give me some labels. If you had to identify 3 labels you had to identify yourself, what would those labels be? And could you use those labels to maybe say a little bit more about who you are and what you do? So maybe let's go with you first, Deja, and Mac, you can go next.
Awesome, that's I'm really excited for the conversation. Labels have been such a huge thing, especially becoming a Paralympic athlete. I have a ton of labels that have been labeled on me through interviews and through competing. And so the first one I'd be labeled as disabled, which I never really saw myself as disabled until I joined the Paralympics, because I was running with, as people call it, able-bodied. I call them traditional athletes. So I was labeled as disabled. And then I was labeled secondly as an athlete. So that was really hard. I always saw myself as just an athlete, and now I became a disabled athlete. And so disabled athlete. And then as this the third one, I would say African American. And when everything was going on with the social justice before the games in 2020, I was seen as a Black athlete before I was seen just as an athlete. I was seen as Black first, and then I was seen as an athlete. And so those are the 3 things that really labeled me and where I am today. And so that's kind of a little bit of where I'm at. And a little bit more about myself. I'm born and raised from Texas. I hear Mac, you're in Texas. Red River's right up the street from me. But yeah, I had no idea what Paralympics were until college. And my coach was actually scared to ask me because he didn't want to offend me, because he didn't think that, he thought when you heard Paralympics, oh, you're not good enough to be on the Olympic level. And after doing more research myself, I realized that, hey, like, I'm able to do things at a level where I can compete at an elite level with people who are in the same community as me. And I've excelled greatly in that perspective of my life. And so seeing how other people tiptoe around people with disabilities has been very interesting, because again, like, I never saw myself with disability. And I was that person for a really long time, tiptoeing around, like, oh, I don't want to talk about it, like your disability or anything like that. But now it's like I'm an open book, and I want people to talk about their disabilities. I want to learn more. And so that's kind of like where I'm at now, and a little bit more about myself.
Yeah, I love that, Deja. And I have a lot of questions I want to ask you, but let's let Mac introduce himself first, and then we'll dive in. Go ahead, Mac.
So we're doing 3 labels. All right. I would say the first one would be that I am ultimately a student athlete at heart. I played sports all my life, and I'm very glad to hold that honor and title. It means something to me, not only as a student or an athlete, but as a person. I feel like that title carries just an honor in itself. And I carried it with great pride, especially when I went to college. Being a trans man, wrestling on the men's team, and it was a great honor that my coach gave me, and I was very fortunate for him to give me the opportunity to be able to wrestle, especially at a private university in Georgia. And then the second label I would say would be that I always had the title trans man wrestler. I wish that I could always just be a man, and that I was never labeled as the trans male wrestler from Euless, Texas, that won 2 girl state championship titles, because I played sports all my life, and it just felt like my story was hijacked by the media, the people of Texas, that were being discriminatory, and just the injustice that I felt in myself. I was like, I can't be an athlete, but I had to get that out of my brain. So I would also say that I'm very intelligent and generous, as well, being labeled because I carry myself in a way that I don't care what people think. I know that I do the sport that I love because I love it. I do it for myself. I do it for the tools and life teachings. I do it because I have connections with these kids, with coaches, with y'all. I'm able to establish these relationships and connections that I've now been able to carry out through my entire life.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot for sharing, Mark. So it sounds like both of you, I think, shared an aspect of identity. I just want to push a little bit deeper on, right? So, we often make the distinction between what I would call surface identity, like the or diversity, the types of differences we could see, right? So people kind of look at you, they make some assumptions, and they label you in particular ways. And then there's the diversity or the differences that we cannot see. And Mac, you kind of alluded to that, right? I'm generous, I'm kind, I'm intelligent. And you alluded to some of that too, Deja, right? Being resilient and tough, right? And proud. how is that navigation of both, I guess, the ways in which people might look at what's on the surface and limit you versus like what I would call like your core or your truer sense of self? So Mark, maybe we start with you, we go to Deja next, and just talk about that juxtaposition of surface identities and the way people might just react to you based on that. Like, here's how you should be, or here's what I assume based on how you look, versus who you are truly at the core.
I've had multiple conversations with people who would be the bare surface of the image, and actually it got so bad to where actually I was no longer labeled as a trans man but a trans female, because the medial look and the social look was like, well, we have no idea who this guy is. And I'm just like, well, we can have a conversation and you can get to know me. When I was in high school, I had like a 3.7 GPA. I didn't really talk to that many people, but I was very socially and spiritually connected to somebody when I would have a conversation with them, because I knew inside of myself, I knew inside of everybody and anybody else that we are all humans. We are all human beings at the end of the day. We all have a duty and connection to the world, but you also have a duty to yourself to make sure that you're getting the most out of who you are as a person. And I wanted to make it very clear to anybody that I talked to that I never meant no ill will on anybody. And I think people were scared and they were using their insecurities and fears of trying to push the inequality, the discrimination, the you can't compete and you can't be in this because you're doing this. But the people at the end of the day got to realize that there are these rules and regulations already that are established by student bodies, by the government bodies in every state, and also at the international level, the national level. And so it's just very bewildering to me that people want to jump and try to use vulgar language in order to try to push these agendas, and also use their fears and insecurities. And I want to try to flip that switch in the sense that, I'm 5'2". I know that I may look kind of, I'm not really that buff, but, people are always like, oh, the testosterone. I'm like, I'm telling you, I was always getting my butt whooped by girls all the time, girls and guys, it doesn't matter. Wrestling in the MMA community, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community is a brutal sport. And it's also a very kind sport as well. And we are all very connected to each other because we're around and rolling with each other all the time. So I always try to establish that generous, kind locomotion when I was either rolling around with people or talking with people and having these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me too, Mark, that there's a lot of resilience, a lot of hard work that goes into it as well. And if people, simply focus on what's on the surface, they don't get to see any of that either. What about you, Deja? What are kind of your thoughts around that surface versus deep kind of identity or diversity?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question, just because I feel like a lot of athletes, especially professional athletes, deal with this. Their identity is just being an athlete. And that's so scary. And I try to tell athletes when they get into the sport, you are not just an athlete, you're more than this. Because when people look at me, they see, oh, you're a Paralympian, you eat, sleep, train, compete, that's all you do. And I'm like, well, no, I have friends, I like to read, I like to write, I like to just be a human. And so I kind of fell into that. And for a long time, I just saw myself as an athlete. I was at the Olympic Training Center for a few years, and I'd wake up, train, eat to make sure my body is ready to train again. It was an athlete 24/7. There was no just like Deja. And below that surface level was a person who loved to read, a person who was family oriented. A lot of people saw me as intimidating. I'm not intimidating at all. I may look like I can kill something, but I am terrified. I can't kill anything, not even a fly. And so it was really hard for me to like balance that. And so I would talk to my therapist, and she'd say, you're multidimensional. And I live by that now. You are a multidimensional person. There's many layers to you. You're an onion. I love using that, just because when you peel back the one layer, there's another person behind that. You're the athlete, pull that layer back. You're the daughter, pull that back. You're the wife, pull that back. And all those things started to play into my life, especially in 2020 when things went on pause. I was like, I can finally play around with these things because I don't have to train. I don't have to compete. I don't have to do anything. I can just live, and I got a taste of that non-athlete life, and I absolutely loved it. And it was the reason for my retirement this past summer. But yeah, and so it was really hard to try to figure out like that balance, and it still is hard sometimes. I'm an expecting mom now. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm still trying to figure out how to balance out everything. And people look at me like, "Oh, well, you were an athlete. What happened?" And it's kind of just like, that's just like not just my identity. And I still deal with that today, and it's really hard just because it becomes such a huge part of you, and you don't know how to separate it. It's like tacky. It's like trying to pull it apart, and it's like gum and hair. You can't pull it apart, and trying to like break it up has been really, really difficult.
I mean, I like that analogy of gum in here, right? Like that just really kind of emphasizes, I think. Yeah, go ahead, Mark, jump in. Go ahead.
It's definitely the expectations. And I absolutely agree with you, Deja. Like for me, I think my transition from high school to college, it was so hard because there was people inside, not only outside of the wrestling room, but inside the wrestling room as well. Even though I was in a very inclusive environment, there were still those people that are like, I think back in time, and it really affected how I viewed sports in general. And that's it's very sad, but it's a reality look in the sense of that, if this is happening to me and I'm a very strong-willed person and I'm able to hold a really strong head on my shoulders, like no one else should have to go through that. We should be having these conversations, no locker room talk. That shouldn't be happening. We should be very open to the idea that people are going to be who they are, and they are more than just, the one outside layer of the shell of the onion. Like there's many layers. I love that reference.
I think just coming off of that, Mark, maybe talk a little bit about, let's first of all get a definition of what we see as intersectional. What does intersectionality mean? And then say a little bit about what does it mean to have a marginalized intersectional identity, right? Because I feel like we're not just talking about intersectionality. We are, in my view, intersectional in many ways. All of us are. But I feel like, there's some marginalized intersectionalities that maybe we should talk about. So Deja or Mac, either you could go first. Like, how did you define intersectionality? And then what does it mean to have a marginalized intersectional identity?
Okay, I go. So I had a really hard time with intersectionality just because I came from so many different places. I was a student athlete, and then I became Paralympian, then I became a pro athlete, and all those things started to come together. And I'm like, okay, then I was a Paralympian, and so a disabled athlete. So there's all these different things, and trying to figure out where to find a center and a good place to just be. I struggled. I didn't find that good place to be until after I graduated from college. And so finally, when I got into the pro circuit, I was like, oh, okay, I can figure this out. I didn't figure it out until after I retired. I was like, oh, it's just so much easier than what I was making it. But then I found, okay, I can make it into, I am a Paralympic athlete, and an intersectional, it came in together with me being Deja Young. And Deja Young, the mental health advocate, the Paralympian, and all these other things that came with me became part of that athlete, which was great because I could show those things on the track and off of the track. So if I'm competing and I'm doing an interview after I'm done competing, I can bring in those other aspects of my mental health and other things that I advocate for. And so that was great. But then I realized that, okay, I was so used to being in like the NCAA, I was so confused because I felt like Paralympians, we were left out. We weren't getting any TV time. We weren't allowed to have fans at our trials where the Olympians were. And so it was this thing where we were just stuck in this one category. We were like the ugly stepchild, it felt like. We were just stuck. And so I still sometimes feel that way as a Paralympian. I have all these accolades. I have never had a sponsorship. And that's insane to a lot of people when they hear that. And it's just because companies aren't looking for Paralympians. And if they are, they're going to try to give you the cheapest deal out there just because they're like, well, we know you guys don't get sponsored, so you're going to take whatever we're going to give you. And so trying to fight that category of being marginalized right there, but well, you're a Paralympian, this is who you are and it's what you get. And it's the bare minimum. And it was really hard just because I felt like, okay, I'm doing all of this work, not saying I'm doing all this work just for that, but I'm doing all this work and I'm not getting anything in return. Is it really worth it? And so that became another thing that I added on into everything else that I was going through. And so it was really hard. And a lot of athletes still go through that. But again, I found a happy medium. I found that while being an athlete, I can still do all of these things and show who I am through that. And so competing with an ally, I was like, if I'm going to compete and have this platform, I'm going to use this platform to share my message, because that's what essentially what we're given a platform for. Every athlete, when they start, I'm like, hey, once you start, you have X amount of time to choose what your platform is going to be. And once you choose your platform, it's really hard to get off of that platform, because trust me, I've tried to get out of the mental health advocate, not try to get out of it, but I try to use other things, but it's always mental health with Daisy Young. And so it's really hard sometimes. But I think that really kind of explains where my intersectionality came from, and then trying to be like marginalized. But again, like with being an athlete, there's so many different aspects to it.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's that intersectionality, but because it intersects with being an athlete, sport was a really good place and a vehicle and an avenue for you to really, make some positives out of that. Your thoughts, Mac?
Definitely the same thing. I feel like, the athletes that have been pushed to the bare minimum, we have very limited options on and what we need to really pick specifically when, and life in general, like you pick one thing and you run with that for the rest of your life. And that was very hard for me when I was younger in high school. And I would tell myself, why is it that I need to pick something at such a young age? Like, I feel like that's so much pressure. I feel like, I should just be able to be myself in a way that, maybe I do want to do this and I want to be that. And I want to teach about mental health. I want to talk about, the anatomy, the biochemistry of just anything when it comes down to plants or when it comes down to the body. I'm a very well-rounded person right now. But I would definitely say that being an athlete has been my concrete foundation for everything that I've established in my life. When it comes to, doing public speaking, talking to nonprofit organizations, creating team projects. I would definitely say that I'm a leadership role in a lot of organizations, and I've had to really take up on that role because I know that I can. And for a while, my mental health really affected that. So that's why I kind of got into psychology in my undergraduate, because I really wanted to understand, if I have this ability, I don't want to limit myself. I know I have these capabilities and these abilities to where I could show other people that, you can do it. It's possible. Nothing is impossible. I always say, it's never the impossible. I think that being a well-rounded person is a good thing, because you are able to give different perspectives on not just only from your life, but from what you see from other people.
Absolutely. So there are two directions I want to go in. So let me pick the allyship one first, and then I'm going to come back and talk about mental health, because both of you have touched on mental health. And I feel like that's an important piece for us to talk about. But let's talk a little bit about allyship first. So both of you have kind of shared, hey, that it has been a struggle. And you've had folks in your life, I think it was coaches in both your cases, who've kind of supported you and helped you get to that next level in terms of your advocacy and your work. What is a way that we can all be allies? I think, for a lot of us who may not have the same identity, there's a struggle sometimes on, well, how can I help? How do I do that in a respectful way? How do I do that in a way that doesn't take away from your voice as well? So maybe say a little bit about allyship for me, maybe what it looks like for you, what has worked well in kind of your situation. Let me go with you first, Mac, and then we go to Deja next.
Number one thing I would say is having these conversations. It's very important. It's tough sometimes. I've had very tough conversations. I remember having a conversation with two of the rugby players at my university, and there was a trans woman that was running on the team, and they had an issue with it. But I was like, wait, why do you have an issue if I'm standing right here? You can't pick and choose, in life, who you get to support or not. So what is it that's so, and they were just like, they just kind of stood there for a second, and they were like, well, you're right. Yeah, there's no difference. Like, everyone should be equally accepted from whether you're playing on a team or not. or if like you pursue a professional career. And that's everyone's personal choice on what they want to do with their life, and no one should be persecuted for that. And so in order for people to be a better ally, give them that platform. Let people tell their stories. Let people don't let the media dictate who they are as a person. If you would like to get to know somebody, or if you want to be jumping in these conversations, you know just daily life conversations. I have conversations with my mother, my family, my friends, in my workspace. It's a hard thing to talk about, and uncomfortable for some people, but we have to get past that barrier, because we're not going to be able to break through the barrier if we're not pushing forward.
Yeah, I like that. So we all need to be, comfortable with our discomfort. It sounds like what you're saying, Mac. Deja.
I mean, that's just life in general. Life is not comfortable.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, I agree with Mac on that one. With pushing through barriers, you have to be uncomfortable. And I think one of the biggest things to become an ally with like people with disabilities is educating yourself. I see so many comments and so many things with simple questions that a simple search could answer your question, instead of asking questions to someone with a disability, and it comes off as offensive sometimes. Like there's a certain etiquette when it comes to asking someone about their disability, or there's certain things that should be done. And so I would like to use the example of the UK. The UK has done an amazing, outstanding job with educating everyone with people with disabilities. When there's a world championship or even a games there, they will run it. First of all, they will run Paralympics 24/7. It's on your TV 24/7. And also when an event comes on and it's a certain classification, they'll explain what the classification is, who qualifies for the classification, what exactly it is, and how it affects the athlete for every single event. And I think that's absolutely amazing. And here in America, we have a long ways to go, just because I feel like a lot of people are still really scared to cross over that line and say, well, I don't know. Like my coach, for example, in college, he's like, oof, I don't know if I can like bring this up with her. And it's like, I've lived with this disability my entire life. I can talk about it, just ask. And I was bullied a lot. And I'm just like, why don't people just ask me? I'd rather you ask me than make fun of me. And I think that's a lot of things I tell a lot of kids that I mentor, that usually bullies, the reason why they bully you is because they don't understand and they're confused and they're kind of dumbfounded, and they don't want to come off as dumb or ignorant. So they're just going to bully and pick on you just because it's the easiest thing to do. It's the easy way out. And so like Max said, like we have to make these conversations uncomfortable. Like it's okay to have these conversations. I was taught, don't bring up religion, don't bring up money, don't bring up politics. I am now bringing up money, bringing up politics, bringing up religion in conversations, just because there's things that need to be talked about. We can't sit here and tiptoe around things if we want change. If we want change, we're going to have to just have these conversations. And so becoming an ally, first step is simply educating yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I guess piggybacking off of that and kind of heading into the mental health aspect of it, say a little bit, I don't want to make you all too vulnerable, so go as far as you're comfortable. Say a little bit about, why mental health is so important, and maybe more importantly, how have you used, the place that you found for yourself to really then begin to advocate and do this work in the respective spaces that you've been advocating for. So I'll go with you, Mac, again first, and then to Deja.
Well, as a hard-headed person in general, it was very hard for me to talk about my mental health. And so I never really challenged myself in high school to really dive deep into who was Mac and who I am, and not just the trans male wrestler in Texas. And my coach always had to remind me of that. And he came from a small town in Ohio, so definitely his perspective was limited. But it was absolutely it hit me when it needed to be hit. And when I got to college, it really hit me more, because not only was I far from home, I didn't have any friends. I felt that I was kind of outcasted. I didn't really have somebody that I could connect to, and my coach finally realized that. I respect him and I love him to this day. And I'm just like, how did you know? He was like, you just know, just as a coach. And that's that student athlete coach relationship. He was like, I knew that you needed need to be reached out to. I just didn't know how. And so he got me in touch with my counselor at school. And that was the best decision that I could have made for myself. He called me every day. He was like, Mac, you better get up. You better get up. It's either practice time, whatever, because everything that happened to me in Texas, it really affected me when I got to college, because I felt that, everyone was like, oh, well, once you wrestle with the guys, like, you're not gonna do as great as you are. You're just a mediocre athlete. You're trash. And I would think to myself, and I started believing it. This is crazy. This is not me as a person. I know who I am. I know that I am Mac Beggs. I am a son. I am a uncle. I am a student. And I don't know why that I let myself limit myself that way, because I know that I am a human being and we all are great. We all can achieve greatness. And that's when I really started. That was the pivotal point for me, was actually recognizing the fact that I needed help and I just couldn't do it all myself. And that these people were having these conversations with me and I didn't feel alone anymore.
Yeah, appreciate you sharing that, Mac. Deja?
Yeah, that's awesome. I unfortunately did not have the resources that Mac did, and I struggled. It was really, really bad. I unfortunately had a suicide attempt. I'm an open book, so it's okay. In 2016, I think like 2 months before, 2.5 months before trials. And it was really hard just because I had been labeled as a student athlete who had everything. And it was so frustrating. I was a full ride scholarship athlete. So I had my apartment paid for, I had my books paid for, school paid for. I was also part of Team USA, so I was getting paid from them. And so it was just like, you have all the money that you need, you have everything paid for. And it was kind of the conversation of, what could you possibly be sad about? And it kind of was like, yeah, well, you're right. Well, maybe I shouldn't just like say anything. And so I struggled, and unfortunately I had the attempt. And unfortunately through that, that's where I got the help that I needed, from antidepressants and counselors and therapists. And Team USA did a very, very good job with reaching out and making sure that I had everything that I needed when it came to sports psychologists and therapists and doctors and everything that I needed to make sure that I could be successful. And it truly helped. I still struggle to this day. I had a very rocky 2016, 2017. It's been a very rocky path of my career. And so it was really hard, but now I speak out about it. I waited about a year before I spoke out about it, just because it was just like, okay, let me be comfortable in my own skin. Let me make sure I'm okay. I don't want to be a hypocrite and start speaking out on something when I'm not following my own advice. And so finally, one day after a competition, I was like, I'm just going to say something. I just blurted it out, and everyone was just like, whoa, that's kind of heavy. And during that time, mental health wasn't really talked about. Like, you couldn't really say anything about mental health, just because it was, again, one of those uncomfortable conversations where it's like, ooh, I want to know how you're doing, but not that deep kind of thing. And so I finally said something, and we started that conversation. And now you see athletes at the games speaking about their mental health, taking a step back from competing because of their mental health. And I think that's an amazing thing that's happened. We still have a long ways to go, but I think it's awesome. We had counselors on deck at the games, crisis counselors. If you're struggling, the numbers are right there on your dorm room to call and say, hey, I need a crisis counselor right now, because it's a very stressful time at the games. And so again, we have a long ways to go when it comes to mental health in sport, but speaking out about mental health has really given my power back. I felt like my power was taken away because everything's been controlled my entire life pretty much with sport. It's like, where am I going? Who's planning my flights? Who's planning my competitions? Who's planning my practice? Who's planning my meal plans? Like, everything's been planned out my entire life. And so that really took a toll on my mental health. And so finally I took my power back and was just like, hey, I'm going to speak out about this. This is one thing that I have of my own that I'm in control of.
Got it. I mean, both of you have kind of alluded to the fact that, one, there were key figures in your life who supported you, but also there were challenges from like a government standpoint and maybe even from an institutional standpoint. So I guess, what more can institutions like colleges, conferences, the NCAA, the government do to make sport a more accepting place, to make sport more accessible for people who have various intersectional identities? Let's hear from you, Deja, and then you, Mac.
I would first say, I think this is kind of biased, and I don't want to sound mean or rude, but we need to really weed out those bad seeds, because those bad seeds take a toll on kids. I have had athletes whose careers were completely ruined by terrible coaches, or I've had athletes just quit the sport just because they couldn't handle the toxicity from their coaches. And I think that really needs to be an eye-opening moment. I think the NCAA could step up and just be like, hey, we're not going to tolerate this. We're not going to allow our athletes to be abused and to be put in these positions of just things that they should be enjoying their sport. They should be able to enjoy the rest of their career throughout college versus being picked on and weighed and picked on because of their sexuality, picked on because of their race. All of these things that should be we're taken care of in college. Our coaches become our second family. They become like a second parent to us. And so we should still be able to feel in a safe place. And also, I just feel like NCAA and even in other institutions and conferences, again, education is huge. A lot of colleges don't know what to do with disabled athletes. How do we adjust our strength programs? How do we adjust our competing programs? Everything that we can do for these disabled athletes, and just becoming more inclusive. Even with math, we had so many programs within track and field at my college that student athletes ran. We had, I can't even think of any right now, sorry, on top of my brain, but we had so many different things that student athletes ran. And I think student athletes should have more of a voice because we are adults, even though sometimes we're treated like children within college, but we are adults and we are allowed to have these opinions. So I think we should be more included. Athletes should be more included in these big conversations because that's where the change should come from. The athletes are the ones who are living through it, and so definitely the athletes are the ones who should be making the changes with their voices.
What about you, Mark? What do you think institutions, government, colleges, etc., can be doing to make sport a more inclusive space?
Definitely, we have to start with definitely weeding out the bad ones, for sure. And in that sense, we have to look at a whole, like the staff. We have to look at the coaches. We have to look at not only coaches, but we also have to look at just regular teachers. I feel like teachers need to also be aware that when they have student athletes in their room, that they also, it's not just down to the books, but because for me it was actually the academic part, and that was and I've always struggled with academics my entire life. I really had to push myself outside of the practice room in order to be a student first, and then an athlete came second, and that was really hard, but we doing it. We doing it. And I feel like maybe also having conversations and getting hold of also these institutions. I got a hold of my old principal last year, and I was like, hey, I just want to personally tell you that there is, bullying going on within the school. And he said, well, how do you know that? I'm like, well, I can name you just, 6 examples just from like 5 years ago, just from the top of my head. And he was like, okay, what do we need to do? And that's where it starts.
I mean, I like the list of things that you all talked about. You talked about, having some of that autonomy and that leadership role within the systems that you are part of. Both of you kind of talked about that. Education around these issues also seems to be a really big thing. It's necessary for those involved to be educated, and then some sort of policies, right? Policies and rules, so that those who do transgress, there's some consequence to action. I guess if you think about
the hardest part with, trying to get the state body in line with not at the local level, but also in the state level. And I love the NCAA. They're not backing down from the state level, from these legislations, especially when it's coming to the fact that they're trying to ban trans kids from competing in sports at the lowest level possible. And also when it comes to also just gender affirming care. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole in itself, my guy.
Yeah. And I guess to that point that you just made, Mark, I wondered, like, what does this look like day to day? So if we speak into this audience right now, what do you hope people take away from this conversation? Maybe what's something they can be doing day to day? My kind of philosophy and belief is, obviously there's a wider system and structure, and we need structural and systemic action. but simultaneously, each and every single one of us can take some steps to make a difference and make the world a better place as well. So maybe what are some of those things? What should people be walking out of this conversation saying, hey, I can do X or I can do Y? You want to go first, Deja? You go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I want people to walk away just knowing that, hey, we're not pointing out that we're uneducated or we're like angry or anything like that. No, I want people to walk away knowing like there's hope for one, and two, you can always become an ally. It's never too late. You can always change. Because a lot of things that we think and that we believe in, we grew up with. I saw that a lot in 2020. A lot of people were seeing like, whoa, I was taught this as a child, but my beliefs have changed and they're different from my family's. And that's okay to have those beliefs. So becoming an ally, it's never too late to become an ally. And again, it's okay to educate yourself. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to really be vulnerable and just to be open, just because these open conversations have to be had if you want to see change. And so just being able to ask questions, it's okay. If you have a friend down the street who's in a wheelchair and you want to have that conversation, have that conversation. It's okay. Like there's no harm done, it's better good than harm. And so being able to have those open conversations and to just walk away knowing that, again, there's hope and that you are part of the change is really important.
Love that. What are your thoughts, Mark? What's one thing or two things people can walk away and do?
I would say knowing that at the end of the day, you have to look out for yourself. I think that's most important. You have to be, I feel like you can't walk through life knowing where to go or what to do if you don't know who you are as a person and establishing that within yourself. Because I'm a firm believer in spirituality. What you put out is what you're going to get back, and what you have inside, you have to put that out. It's all about like transferring of energy. You put good out, you're going to get good back. I'm a very firm believer that, and that there is hope. There's hope that we got people on this panel right now. We're fighting for that justice, because we know that there is definitely, the gold at the end of the rainbow. And it's going to be beautiful. People are trying to stop change, and that's not going to happen. And it's just how the world works. The world is always changing. People are changing, and people got to get with it. I tell people all the time, either get with it or get out. It is what it is. It is what it is. Lifeline motto.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess, and we're starting to get some questions coming in from the audience. So this one I think is a really good one. As I've thought about the work I've done around racism in particular, people have kind of tiptoed in asking me questions as a Black man, right? Like, they want to ask about the Black experience or what it might feel like to be discriminated against, but they're not sure how to approach that. Deja, you kind of mentioned earlier, that sometimes the way their line of questioning might be offensive. So I guess thoughts from both of you around how do people ask these questions, right? Deja, you just said, hey, I want people to talk about this. And if you want to know more, you should be asking more. But I guess, how do you ask and not be offensive? I know I basically just tell people, just ask. That's what I say in terms of my case. But I guess, what is it like for you, Deja? What is it like for you, Mac, in terms of, your identity and the questions that people might want to ask but don't know how to?
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's so confusing. It's like, ask questions, but know how to ask them correctly. I know that's so insane, especially within my community. But if you see someone walking through the grocery store, for example, and they are missing a leg, this is one of the biggest things in our community, do not go up to them and say, oh, thank you for your service, or just assume. Assuming, we all know what assuming makes you and me. Let's not assume. And I think that's the biggest thing, is the assumptions. That makes it really hard for us in this community. It's just assuming on what you think you know. Or if I park in a handicapped parking space and you don't see stability, do not yell at me because you think I am taking up a handicapped parking space just because, You're not going to yell at a veteran who has disabled veteran plates when they get out of their Corvette or out of their convertible or anything and say, oh, well, you're not disabled. It's like all disabilities aren't visible. So let's not assume and place everyone under the same umbrella, but simply just ask the question. Like when I was in high school, I'd rather ask people ask me like, oh, what happened? Or, oh, why do you run this way? Or how does it get to this point? Kind of thing, instead of just making assumptions and going with it instead of asking the question. And so I think it's just really just being a decent human being at the end of the day, being nice. It's not that hard to be kind. And so being kind and asking those questions with kindness really, really helps instead of being so aggressive and just really just assuming. It's been really hard just because I've had that happen. I've been in line at the airport and someone saw my Paralympian tag on my backpack and it's like, you don't look like a Paralympian. I'm like, okay, then what does a Paralympian look like? Please explain to me. Like, I want to know, like, what do you think a Paralympian looks like? And he proceeded to explain someone who was missing a limb or in a wheelchair. And I was like, well, all disabilities aren't the same. You have classes, you look at people in some of these classes, like, how are you even disabled, I guess. So again, like using kindness and just being kind and not assuming really helps with those questions.
Yeah, I definitely think that sensitivity and empathy is important in asking them. You wanna chime in on that at all, Mark?
Yeah, 100%. Definitely not assuming. I really want to reiterate on that as well, because people still think that I'm not a trans man anymore, and I'm in like the category of being with the trans females, and that's really kind of like a God, because I present myself in a way that this is who I am. I'm very vocal about who I am as a person, and the fact that you refuse to do your research, you refuse to not have that proper etiquette of being respectful and asking me personally, or just doing the research and having these conversations. You want to put out in the world that you know who I am. I'm this, I'm that. Everything about my life. No, that's not it. I definitely think that assumptions have been very pushed in this time, and I feel like in the past like 15, 20 years. And I feel like we're now flipping a switch on that in the sense of, it's not I guess the local levels people's job to know who we are as a person. That's not, you don't get to know that part of me in my life. You don't need to know that part of me. What you need to know is that I'm a student athlete. I am a wrestler. I am a jujitsu guy. I am a man, and I hold that role very strongly. I'm a good man. I am a strong man, and that I'm very kind. I'm very generous, and I'm more than just these labels that everyone puts on me.
I guess, kind of going off of the assumptions that people might make and, bringing it full circle. I think we started with a question on labels and you just kind of raised it again, Mark. How does one, right? So I want you maybe to talk to those who might have some of these marginalized intersectional identities as well. How do you cope and deal with, at a minimum, the microaggressions that you face, right? Both of you talked about some of these struggles, you've overcome those, and you've become an advocate, you've become a voice for your platform and your identities. But how do others do that? How maybe give them a couple tips on how they might deal with some of those microaggressions. I'll start with you first, Mark, and then we kick it to Deja.
Definitely allowing yourself to be vocal about yourself. I ever since the media hijacked my story, from that point in time, I said to myself, okay, I don't want people making assumptions. I don't want people putting labels on me. So you know what? I'm just gonna, create videos every day. I will do daily activities of like me doing this or doing that, cooking, doing a small workout like on the patio, taking a run with my dog. I'm more than just the label. I'm definitely a person at the end of the day. I was reading yesterday morning. I was hanging out with my friends. I was hanging out with my family. I went and worked out with my friends because at the end of the day, that I am an athlete and I want to be the best possible. I want to get the best possible, best version of myself that I can be, without limiting myself just because of what everyone else is saying.
Love that. Deja, your thoughts?
Yeah, coping has not been my easiest. I'm very stubborn and I am kind of the type of person who's kind of blunt sometimes and kind of just, I let everyone know how I feel all the time. My coach loves that about me. And I'm a why person. I like to ask why all the time. But no, when it comes to, I finally figured out coping, I think the last year and a half of my career, and it was just kind of accepting. I think the accepting part was hard. I had a really hard time accepting things the way that they are. I grew up as a kid who thought everyone's gonna be my friend, everyone's gonna like me, kind of idea in my head, and having to accept that everyone's not your friend, everyone's not gonna like you, kind of thing. It was really hard. But I think just kind of finding that acceptance within myself and within my community really, really helped, just because I was just like, okay, well, this is how things are going to be. There are going to be some people who are going to be ignorant, who aren't going to do the research, who aren't going to educate themselves. And there are going to be people who do want to educate themselves. And so I try to surround myself with those people. And when I come across people who don't want to, it's kind of just like, okay. And I hear these labels, I hear these different comments and things. It's kind of just like, all right, like, I'll say my piece, but I'm not going to continue to waste my energy and breath on someone who just doesn't want to learn. And that's okay. It became really hard just because I want everyone to get along. I want everyone to be happy. I want this unity, this perfect little world. And of course, it's not going to happen. It's like a beautiful rainbow. Yes, a beautiful rainbow, and just everyone getting along, holding hands, singing kumbaya, and that's just not going to happen. And so again, acceptance really helps me get through that.
Wonderful. I mean, I've been really honored to have these conversations with both of you today. One of the things that really kind of just strikes me, right, is the humanity in the conversations. You know, we talked about empathy, we talked about sensitivity, we talked about just being able to recognize and see one another as human beings who want to achieve their greatest potential, right? And that's all that we're working towards. I guess, you know, as we kind of close things out, what's the one last thought that you'd want to leave everyone with? I'll go with you first, Deja, and then Max. So one last big idea, whether it's about you personally, whether it's about the platform that you advocate for, what's the big takeaway that folks are walking out of this conversation with today?
I would say we all have room to grow. I'm not perfect. I still have things I want to grow and educate myself on, and things that I want to do better. And I want everyone to know it's okay to admit that. It's okay to admit that you don't know a certain amount of things. It's okay to admit that you aren't educated in a certain area in your life, and that's okay. But also, I want everyone to know that we're moving forward because we're having these conversations. Now that we've had these conversations, it takes a spark to start a fire. And so now that the spark has started, everything's going to start spreading like a fire, and we're going to get things done and get things changed.
Love that. Mark, final thoughts.
Dang, Deja, how do I follow up with that? Drop the mic. No, definitely 100%. Making sure we're having these conversations on a daily basis, giving these people the platform to tell their stories, especially the media. The media needs to be the number one, honestly, the leader in this fight with when it comes to people of color, racial injustice, trans athlete inequality in general, against the LGBT community, socially, to the outsiders. We need to give power to these people because we are the pioneers right now, and we are leading the way. And you're right, Deja, it's changing, and people better get with it because you're gonna get left behind.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, again, I want to thank you both for spending some time with us today, sharing your story, being vulnerable. I think one of the things that I want to share with everyone, just from my point of view, is just re-emphasizing that we are all personally on a journey, right? A journey of growth, and a journey of acceptance, and a journey of understanding. And all of us need to challenge ourselves on that. That's the only way we're going to continue to grow. Again, really excited to have been a part of this conversation. Our thoughts are with Nevin, who couldn't make it with us today because of an emergency. And with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Kate, to close us out.
Andrew, thanks so much. Deja, Mac, thank you both so much. Really inspiring to hear both of your stories and have you share your perspectives on identity and privilege and discrimination. Your stories are both individually so inspiring, and you've left our audience with some really tangible takeaways. And you're right, Mac, Deja could drop the mic on that that last line, but what we'll take is like we're moving forward, and that is exactly where we want to be. So much appreciation to our moderator, Andrew. Wonderful job as always, and to the two of you, thanks so much for being here. To our attendees, we are going to switch gears into a networking session right now. I am going to pull up a prompt here, so please follow along. We are going to sort of build off of this identity session now, and you will have a chance to connect with some of your conference peers in small sort of circle roundtables that'll shuffle every 10 minutes. And the way we'd like you to introduce yourself is to do just what Deja and Mac did, which is pick 3 labels that you might use as you look to introduce yourselves for the first 45 seconds or so. So that'll take place here at 12:15. So right now, as you exit this session, you'll be prompted to join the networking session. And then just a final reminder that our last session of the day will kick off at 1 p.m. And that is another amazing group of panelists to talk about Title IX and the contemporary issues around Title IX. So thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Andrew, Deja, and Mac. So great to see you all. And we'll see you in the next session. Take care.